What if one night, as the storm rages and the winds howl, you wake up to find your firstborn child gone? No trace, no sign, just an empty mat. As fear spreads through the village, a chilling question echoes. What dark force has taken them, and why? Naima awoke with a sudden jolt. Her heartbeat echoed in her chest, wild and frantic. Her eyes shot open, and in that instant she knew something was wrong. She reached for her son, Nuru, but his mat was empty, cold. A tightness gripped. Her chest, her breath quickened. She shot out of bed and staggered toward the door, her body trembling with dread. "Nuru! Nuru!" Her voice cracked like a twig underfoot, but there was no answer. The silence that followed felt deeper than the storm's fury. She ran into the village, her voice calling for her child. But as she did, she heard others. From the shadows of the huts, from the narrow paths between the trees, other voices joined hers. "Nuru! Nuru!" But not just her voice. Other mothers, other fathers. The pain in their voices made the storm feel still. The village had awakened to the terror of a lost night. Torches flared to life, casting dancing shadows across the villagers' faces. Eyes wide with fear, hands clutching each other in desperation, their cries filled the night. The rain no longer mattered, nor did the thunder. What mattered now was the unshakable truth that no one dared speak aloud. Every firstborn in the village was gone, vanished like smoke in the wind. A heavy silence settled over the gathered villagers, broken only by the sound of weeping and murmurs of disbelief. Baba Jengo, the elder, stepped forward, his eyes as old as the hills. His voice, though aged, carried the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. He spoke not with fear, but with the grave tone of one who had seen too much. "This has happened before," Baba Jengo said softly, his words barely rising above the storm's fury. "A curse, spoken long ago, buried beneath our forgetfulness." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. The villagers exchanged uncertain glances. They had heard such stories in their youth, stories meant to frighten children into obedience. But no one truly believed them. "It's just the wind playing tricks," one man muttered, shaking his head. "Old stories, nothing more." But Baba Jengo's eyes did not waver. They were the eyes of a man who had seen both the joy and sorrow of many lifetimes. He looked at the gathered villagers with a quiet urgency. "The curse is real," he said, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of truth. "And now, we must face its consequences." The whispers that rippled through the crowd grew louder, full of doubt and fear. Spirits, some believed. Others whispered about vengeful ancestors, angry at being forgotten. Some even blamed the gods themselves, accusing them of taking what had been stolen long ago. No one knew the truth, but they all felt the terror in their bones. The night seemed endless, and the storm no longer felt like nature's rage. It felt as though the very sky had turned against them. The villagers searched the shadows, calling out to the lost children. But no answers came. Only the sound of the wind, the weeping of mothers, and the restless storm. What was the truth? Who or what had taken the firstborns? The village of Mabail could only wait, lost in the deafening noise of fear and unanswered questions. Mabail was a village like no other, tucked away between dense forests and rolling hills. It was a place where the air always carried the smell of the earth and the sound of distant birds, where traditions were not just rules but the very heartbeat of the people. For generations, the villagers lived by their customs, guided by elders and ancestors. Superstitions ran deep, like the rivers that cut through the land, flowing with stories of the past. But even the strongest traditions could not protect them from the unknown, from the shadows that crept silently into their lives. Nia stood in the middle of the village, her fists clenched tight against the gnawing grief that tore at her heart. Her brother, little Cato, was gone, taken in the dead of night without a trace. Fear hung thick in the air, spreading like smoke. Yet Nia's resolve burned brighter than the fear. She would not weep silently like the others. She would not wait for answers to fall from the sky like rain. "No," Nia whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I will find them. I will find the truth." Her eyes were fierce, filled with the fire of a sister's, love and the weight of a village's sorrow. She could hear the wails of mothers, the shouts of fathers, but none of it reached her heart. She had a task, and nothing could break her from it. Baba Django, the village elder, watched the chaos unfold with a heavy heart. His eyes, old and full of years, seemed to see beyond the fear that clouded the minds of the people. He had lived through many storms, both in the sky and in the hearts of men. This was different, though. This was not the first time fear had gripped the village, but it was the first time the fear had a name, a curse. And Baba Django knew that every story told by the fire carried a truth, even if it had long been forgotten. He cleared his throat and spoke, his voice low and steady. "Fear is the shadow of ignorance," he said, his words cutting through the cries. "But the shadow does not grow without the sun to cast it." He looked at the gathering crowd, his gaze holding a story none of them had been ready to hear. Kofi, the hunter, stood off to the side, his spear sharp and his eyes sharper. He snorted, a bitter sound that mixed with the wind. "Curses?" he muttered, his voice thick with doubt. "Children do not vanish by magic. We're men of the earth, not of stories." His hands tightened around the spear's shaft, his grip steady and firm. He trusted his skill, his strength, his sharp eyes. There was no spirit that could take a child, he thought. Yet the cries of the mothers pierced him too, gnawing at his certainty. Deep down, a seed of doubt began to grow, though he refused to admit it. Mama Sefu's grief shattered the night, her cries cutting through the storm like a spear through flesh. The wails of a mother in pain could silence the strongest of hearts. She rocked back and forth, clutching her son's blanket tightly against her chest. She had lost her child, and no one could ease her sorrow. Not the rain, not the elders, not even time. Her heart was a wound, and the pain was raw and unyielding. Baba Django stepped forward, his old hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "Long ago," he began, his voice softer now, "we made a pact with Nyoka, the river god." His eyes turned distant, as though the memories of that time were too heavy to carry. "We promised to honor him, to give him the respect that his power demands. But we broke that promise." The villagers listened in silence, the only sound now the wind and the soft crackle of fire. "Nyoka was not pleased," Baba Django continued. "And so the god's wrath was swift. He cursed the firstborns, saying that until the debt was paid, they would be taken from us." The air grew thick with tension as the villagers absorbed Baba Django's words. The curse, spoken long ago, was no longer a myth. It was real. The village was paying the price for their broken promise. Some scoffed, others trembled. "Old tales, just old stories," a man whispered, his voice barely a breath. But Baba Django's eyes were like stone, unyielding. He had seen too much to lie. The chief, who had once dismissed the warnings as superstitions, now stood frozen. He had once waved away the stories with a laugh, but now, with their children gone, the laughter died in his throat. His eyes turned to Baba Django, seeking guidance, seeking the truth. "What must be done?" the chief asked, his voice low with fear. Baba Django lowered his head, deep in thought. "The curse must be broken," he murmured, "but the cost will not be small." Panic began to spread through the crowd, faster than the storm. Some whispered of fleeing, of running to escape the curse, to save themselves and their children. Others, the warriors and the brave, gripped their spears tighter, ready to fight against the unseen force that took their children. But Nia, with her heart full of grief and fire, stepped forward. Her voice rang out, clear and strong against the whispers of fear. "We cannot flee," she said. "We cannot fight what we do not understand. The truth lies in the past, and we must uncover it if we are to save our children." Her words were firm, a call to action. The village stood at a crossroads, fear pulling them in one direction, hope pulling them in another. Would they follow Nia's courage, or would they be swallowed by the storm of doubt? "Elders," she spoke, her voice strong yet shaking, "do not tell me that my brother is gone forever. There must be an answer, something in the past, something we have missed." She stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "If the past holds the key, I will find it. I will not bury my hope." Baba Jengo, the village elder who had lived through countless storms, watched her intently. He could see the raw pain in her eyes, but there was a stubbornness there too, something familiar. He sighed, his voice low and heavy with age. "Child," Baba Jengo began, his words slow and full of weight. "I know you are hurting, and your heart is full of fire. But there are things in this world that even the strongest cannot understand. The curse was not born of our hands, but of our ancestors, and the only way to break it is to seek Nyoka's favor." Nia's eyes widened, and the weight of his words sank in. "Nyoka," she whispered, feeling the ancient god's name on her lips. "But Baba Jengo, how? How do we find Nyoka?" The elder's eyes clouded with sadness, his wrinkled hands shaking as he spoke. "Nyoka, the river god, is not a spirit to be summoned lightly. You must go into the forbidden forest, the one that no one dares enter. It is said that the forest is alive with the spirits of those who failed before you, and few who have entered have ever returned." Baba Jengo paused, his face etched with regret. "But if you seek the truth, then you must go. There is no other way." Nia stood still, the weight of his words sinking deep into her heart. She could feel the cold of fear creeping up her spine, but her resolve did not falter. "Then I will go." Kofi, the village hunter, had been listening quietly from the shadows. He had heard the stories, scoffed at them, but the fear in his own heart had begun to grow. He gripped his spear tightly, his jaw clenched. He could not allow Nia to face this alone. "I will go with you," he said finally, his voice steady but not without hesitation. "I do not believe in curses, not in the way the old stories speak. But there is truth in what you seek, Nia, and I will not let you go into that forest alone." Nia's heart leapt with relief, though she knew the path ahead was fraught with danger. "Thank you, Kofi. Together we will uncover the truth." And so they set out toward the forest, the village watching them as they disappeared beyond the edge of the known world. The trees loomed large as the two of them entered the forbidden forest. The path ahead seemed endless, and the silence was unbearable. The air felt thick, as if the forest itself were watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Nia clutched her brother's necklace tightly in her hand, her breath shallow. Kofi's eyes darted around, his spear raised in front of him. "I do not like this place," Kofi muttered, his voice tense. "It is as though the forest knows we are here." Nia did not answer. She had no words to offer. All she could do was press forward, feeling the presence of the unseen forces closing in around them. The air grew heavier, and low whispers began to swirl around them. It wasn't the wind. No, this was something else, something ancient. Voices without bodies, voices that carried their names, their deepest fears. "Nia," a voice whispered softly, as if just behind her ear. She spun around, but there was nothing. "Kofi, did you hear that?" she asked, her voice a tremble of fear. Kofi looked around, his hand tightening on his spear. I heard it, he muttered, but there is nothing here, nothing but the forest. The whispers grew louder, circling them. Were they being guided, or were they being warned? The mist came next, slowly at first, curling around their feet, then thicker, swallowing them whole. The path in front of them twisted, shifting with each step they took. They walked, but the same trees appeared again and again, as though they were walking in circles. This cannot be, Nia whispered, her heart racing. We are trapped, Kofi. The forest is playing tricks on us. Kofi's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the mist. Stay close, he warned. We cannot lose our way here. The mist thickened, and with it a sense of foreboding that pressed down upon them, suffocating. They were lost, and the forest knew it. And then, as though summoned by the very air around them, a figure emerged from the shadows. An old woman, bent with age, her skin dark and weathered like the bark of the ancient trees. Her eyes were deep, pools of forgotten knowledge, and her voice was like the rasping of dried leaves. You seek answers, the old woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. But do you have the courage to pay the price? Nia and Kofi stood frozen, unsure whether they should speak or wait. The woman's presence was both terrifying and compelling. Who are you? Nia asked, her voice small but firm. I am Mama. Zawadi, the woman replied, and I hold the key to your path, but you must first understand the cost of what you seek. Nia's breath caught in her throat. What must we do to free them? She demanded, her voice a sharp edge of desperation. Mama Zawadi's lips curled into a faint smile. You must make an offering to Nyoka, the river god. Go to the abandoned temple. There, the god will decide if your hearts are worthy. But there is more, Mama Zawadi added, her voice grave. Many have entered the temple, but none have returned. The price will be steep. Are you ready to pay it? Nia glanced at Kofi, her heart racing. There was no turning back now. We, Jagti, are ready, Nia said, her voice steady despite the terror rising within her. We must free them. Kofi nodded, his face grim. We have no choice. We go forward. And so, with the path before them uncertain, Nia and Kofi moved toward the abandoned temple, the weight of the unknown heavy on their hearts. There would be no turning back. They had come too far. Nia and Kofi stood before the temple, a place of old promises long forgotten. The stones were worn by time, and the air was thick with silence. Vines twisted around the broken walls, each one like a chain that bound the temple to its past. Nia felt her heartbeat quicken. This was the place where the curse had begun, and the place where it would end. Nia stepped forward, her voice quiet but strong. We've come to undo what was done. The past can be fixed. I know it. Kofi, who had followed her through the forest, stood behind her, uncertainty in his eyes. Are you sure? This place, it feels wrong. Nia nodded, though her own fear gnawed at her insides. The spirits have called us here, Kofi. We must not turn back now. They moved together into the temple, and the air seemed to change. It was as if the very walls were alive, breathing with the weight of memories. Soft voices whispered, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. They were faint, but there was no mistaking them. Do you hear that? Kofi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nia nodded again, her heart heavy. The children. They are here, but they cannot reach us. As they walked deeper, a shimmering veil appeared in front of them, as if the very air itself had become a barrier. Beyond the veil, shadowy figures stirred, figures of children, their faces twisted in anguish. Nia reached out, but her hand was stopped by the unseen force. Why can't we help them? Kofi asked, his voice cracking. They're so close. Why can't they touch us? Nia shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. We must speak to the river god. Only he has the power to set them free. Suddenly, the earth trembled beneath their feet. A deep rumble shook the temple, and from the darkness emerged a massive serpent, its scales glimmering in the dim light. Its eyes were a bright, glowing blue, and its presence filled the space with an ancient power. This was Nyoka, the river god. "You dare enter my temple?" Nyoka's voice boomed, ancient and unyielding. "What do you seek?" Nia fell to her knees, her voice shaking. "We seek the children, Nyoka. The firstborns taken by the curse. Please, we beg of you, set them free," Nyoka hissed, his voice a low growl. "You seek forgiveness, but you do not understand the cost. The village has broken an oath made long ago, and I will take what is owed." Kofi, who had been standing in the shadows, stepped forward. "There must be another way. The children cannot die. You cannot ask for a life in exchange for a life." Nyoka's eyes narrowed, glowing with an eerie intensity. "You do not understand. A life for a life, that is the price of the past. Only then will the firstborns be free." Nia's heart twisted. The weight of the decision bore down on her. How could she choose who must die? It was the village's sin, but she could not bear to make this choice. "No," Kofi said, his voice trembling. "There must be another way. Please, Nyoka, we cannot." Nyoka's voice interrupted him, cold and final. "You have no more time for questions. I will offer you one chance, a riddle from the past. Solve it, and the children may live. Fail, and the sacrifice will be made. The answer lies in the forgotten oath." Nia closed her eyes, the memories of Baba Jengo's teachings flooding her mind. She remembered his words, his wisdom. The village had stolen sacred water during a great drought, breaking their promise to Nyoka. Could this be the key to the riddle? She opened her eyes, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "The village broke an oath. They took from you when they promised to protect the sacred water. That was the betrayal, the sin that weighs upon us all." Nyoka's gaze never shifted. His expression remained cold, and he listened, but there was no sign of forgiveness in his eyes. "Truth is not enough," he said. "The past cannot be undone with words. Justice must still be paid." Nia's heart was heavy as she stood, feeling the weight of her people's sins. She knew what had to be done. "Then, if justice must be served, I will offer myself. Let me take the place of the children." Kofi's eyes widened in shock. "No, you can't." But Nia's voice was firm. "If a life must be taken, let it be mine. I have come this far to save them. Let me bear the weight of our people's wrongs." Nyoka's eyes glowed brighter, his voice thoughtful. "You are brave, child, but bravery alone does not satisfy the balance of life. There is one last task you must complete." Nia stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. "I will do whatever it takes." Nyoka's gaze softened, just for a moment. "You must carry sacred water from this temple to your village. Not a drop may fall. Only then will the curse be lifted." Nia stood tall, her spirit unwavering. "I will carry the water, and I will return with it. The curse ends tonight." As the river god's presence faded, a quiet hope filled Nia's heart. She had one final task before the curse could be lifted, and she would not falter. The village would be saved, and the children would come home. Nia stepped out of the temple, the vessel of sacred water clutched tightly in her hands. It was small, but it held the power to change everything. The weight of the task before her pressed down on her shoulders. Each drop carried the fate of the village. She could not fail. Her heart pounded as she began her journey back, but the forest around her seemed to come alive. The shadows whispered, swirling with words that made her pause. She could hear the voices, soft, familiar, like a dream from long ago. "Nia, come home. A voice called, and she knew it was her mother's voice, warm and full of love. "Come back to us, daughter. You've done enough." But Nia shook, her head, her breath catching in her throat. She had to push forward. She could not be swayed. "I cannot come back," she whispered to the wind. "I have made my choice. I will save them." The voices faded, but the shadows remained, shifting. Like dark hands reaching out for her. The path seemed to stretch endlessly before her. Each step was harder than the last, as if the very earth was trying to pull her down, to make her stop. But Nia would not stop. She had come too far, and the village was depending on her. With every step, the weight of the journey pressed more, heavily upon her, yet she walked on, unyielding. At last, she reached the village outskirts. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, but her spirit remained strong. The villagers had no idea what she had endured, but they would know soon enough. She walked toward the well, her heart racing with anticipation. As the sacred water touched the well, the sky darkened. A powerful wind rose up, swirling through the village, making the trees bow and the leaves dance in the air. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the silence was broken by joyous cries. The lost children, those taken by the curse, had returned. Nia sank to her knees, overwhelmed by relief and sorrow. They were free. The curse was lifted. But just as the village began to celebrate, a voice, cold and distant, reached Nia's ears. It was Nyoka's voice, carried by the wind, a reminder of the price that had been paid. "Remember," Nyoka's voice warned, "break the pact again, and the price will be heavier. Never forget the cost of betrayal." The wind fell silent once more, but the weight of the words lingered in the air, a warning for all to hear. The villagers had been spared, for now, but they knew that their future would depend on honoring the sacred bond they had made. Kofi, standing at Nia's side, looked out over the crowd. No longer a skeptic, he understood now the importance of preserving the village's history. He raised his voice, steady and strong, for all to hear. "We must protect this story," Kofi declared. "The past will not be forgotten. Our future depends on the wisdom of those who came before us. We will never make the same mistake again." The people nodded, their faces filled with gratitude and new understanding. The curse was gone, but the lesson would stay with them forever. The village celebrated the return of their children, yet a quiet sorrow lingered. Though the curse was lifted, the weight of past mistakes still pressed on their hearts. Baba Jengo stood before them, his voice steady. "The past is never gone. Faith and tradition must be honored. Forgetting brings ruin." Nia, humbled by the people's praise, spoke softly. "I only did what was right. Praise is not mine." The elders, with solemn resolve, restored the ancient customs, pledging to respect Nyoka and the river god forever. The children, though returned, carried silent memories, changed by their time in the spirit world.